Your Honor, I have evidence that you've been communicating with the prosecution outside of court. Those 12 words, delivered with surgical precision in open court, would end a judge's 30-year career and expose a conspiracy so brazen that it would trigger a federal investigation. What started as a routine criminal trial turned into a constitutional crisis when a defense attorney discovered text messages that should never have existed. By the end of this hearing, the judge would be removed from the bench, the prosecutor would face disbarment, and a man who was hours away from conviction would walk free. Let me show you exactly how this unfolded. Today's case takes place in the Circuit Court of Jefferson County, Alabama, presided over by Judge Robert Hendricks, a veteran of the bench with 32 years of judicial experience and a reputation for running a tight courtroom. He was known as Maximum Bob among local attorneys, not just for his harsh sentences, but for his absolute control over his courtroom. The case, State of Alabama versus Devon Mitchell, charged with armed robbery, aggravated assault, and weapons possession. Combined, these charges carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 25 years in prison. According to the prosecution, led by District Attorney Chief Prosecutor Amanda Reeves, the case was overwhelming. Devon Mitchell, a 32-year-old mechanic with no prior criminal record, had allegedly robbed a convenience store at gunpoint, pistol-whipping the clerk before fleeing with $340 in cash. The state had eyewitness testimony. They had surveillance footage showing someone matching Mitchell's description. They had the victim's positive identification. And they had a weapon found near Mitchell's apartment that matched the description of the robbery weapon. On paper, this was a conviction waiting to happen. Amanda Reeves had a 94% conviction rate, and she wasn't about to let this case damage her perfect record for the quarter. But Devon Mitchell had something that would change everything, a defense attorney who paid attention to details that everyone else missed. His name was Marcus Webb, a former public defender turned private attorney, and he was about to deliver a masterclass in trial advocacy while exposing corruption that reached the highest levels of the local justice system. What nobody in that courtroom knew, except Marcus Webb and soon the entire world, was that Judge Hendricks had been helping the prosecution win their case through illegal, secret communications. He forgot that in the digital age, everything leaves a trail. The trial had been going badly for the defense. This was day 4, and the prosecution had systematically built what seemed like an unshakable case. Amanda Reeves was in her element. She'd called the store clerk, who testified that Devon Mitchell was definitely the man who robbed him. She'd called a police officer who testified about finding the gun 3 blocks from Mitchell's apartment. She'd played the grainy surveillance footage that showed a figure in a dark hoodie and jeans, clothes that, coincidentally, were found in Mitchell's closet during a search. Marcus Webb had cross-examined aggressively, but Judge Hendricks had sustained objection after objection from the prosecution, cutting off Webb's most effective lines of questioning. Your Honor, I'm trying to establish the witness's ability to identify. Sustained. Move on, Mr. Webb. Your Honor, the chain of custody for this weapon is critical. Sustained. The weapon has been properly authenticated. Next question. It happened over and over. Every time Webb got close to poking holes in the state's case, Judge Hendricks shut him down. To the jury, it looked like the defense attorney was grasping at straws while the judge maintained proper courtroom order. But Marcus Webb noticed something. Something small. Something that most attorneys would have missed. Every time Amanda Reeves stood to object, and she objected constantly, there was a brief pause before she spoke. Just a fraction of a second. Like she was waiting for something. And every time, her hand was in her jacket pocket. Watch what happens next. This is where a small observation becomes a constitutional crisis. It was the afternoon of day 4. The prosecution had rested, and Marcus Webb was preparing to call his first defense witness when he made his move. Your Honor, may we approach the bench? Judge Hendricks looked annoyed. Make it quick, counsel. Webb and Reeves approached. Webb spoke in a low voice, but his words were recorded by the court reporter. Your Honor, I'm making a formal motion for a mistrial based on improper ex parte communications between the court and the prosecution. The courtroom went silent. Ex parte communications, Secret conversations between a judge and one side of a case are absolutely forbidden. They destroy the fundamental fairness of a trial. Judge Hendricks's face went red. Mr. Webb, that is a serious accusation. Do you have any evidence to support this inflammatory claim? I do, Your Honor. Amanda Reeves stepped forward. Your Honor, this is clearly a desperate attempt by the defense to derail a trial they're losing. I move to sanction Mr. Webb for making baseless allegations. The allegations aren't baseless, Webb interrupted. Your Honor, I have evidence that you and Ms. Reeves have been exchanging text messages throughout this trial, discussing case strategy, evidence, and how to block my lines of questioning. The color drained from Judge Hendricks's face. That's absurd, Reeves said, but her voice cracked slightly. Webb pulled out his phone. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a series of text messages sent from your personal cell phone to Ms. Reeves's personal cell phone over the past 4 days. Judge Hendricks's eyes went wide. How did you? That's privilege. Actually, Your Honor, there's no privilege for illegal communications. And these messages were sent using the courthouse Wi-Fi network, which is monitored for security purposes. This is important. Pay attention to what happens next, because this is where everything falls apart. Judge Hendricks tried to regain control. Mr. Webb, I don't know what you think you have, but I can assure you. Would you like me to read some of them aloud, Your Honor? Or should we do this in chambers? The judge's jaw clenched. He looked at Amanda Reeves, whose hand was gripping the edge of the bench so hard her knuckles were white. Chambers. Now. The jury was escorted out confused. The defendant sat at the defense table, hardly daring to hope. And the packed gallery began whispering among themselves. Something big was happening. In chambers, with only the court reporter present, Marcus Webb laid out his evidence. Your Honor, 4 days ago, at 11:47 p.m., the night before trial began, you sent Ms. Reeves a text message that read, and I quote, "Don't worry about the gun. I'll sustain any chain of custody objections. Just get it in front of the jury." Judge Hendricks opened his mouth, but no words came out. Webb continued. On day 2, at 1:23 p.m., during the lunch recess, you texted Ms. Reeves, "Webb is going to attack the witness's identification. Cut him off on relevance. I'll back you up." And yesterday, at 4:45 p.m., after court adjourned, you sent this message. The jury is leaning guilty, but not unanimous yet. Make sure your closing hits the fear angle hard. These people want to feel safe. Webb placed his phone on the judge's desk. I have 17 separate messages spanning the entire trial. Your Honor, you haven't been presiding over a fair trial. You've been coaching the prosecution. Amanda Reeves finally spoke, her voice desperate. Those messages are taken out of context. What context makes it acceptable for a judge to tell a prosecutor how to argue their case? Webb shot back. What context makes it legal for a judge to promise to sustain objections before they're even made? Judge Hendricks slumped in his chair. For 32 years, he'd sat in judgment of others. Now he was the one being judged. How did you get these messages? He asked quietly. I didn't hack anything, if that's what you're implying, Webb said. 3 days ago, I noticed Ms. Reeves checking her phone in her pocket before making objections. The timing was too perfect. She was getting signals. So I submitted a routine discovery request to the court's IT department for all electronic communications sent over the courthouse network related to this case. The IT department is required by federal law to maintain logs of network usage. When they pulled the logs, they found dozens of text messages between your personal device and Ms. Reeves's personal device, all sent using courthouse Wi-Fi. Because you were using a government network for the communications, they're not protected by any privacy expectation. Webb leaned forward. Your Honor, you didn't just cross a line. You obliterated it. Here's where it gets really interesting. Watch how a judge reacts when he realizes his career is over. Judge Hendricks sat in silence for a full minute. Amanda Reeves looked like she might be sick. Finally, the judge spoke. Mr. Webb, those communications they were just informal discussions about procedure. They were illegal, Webb said flatly. They violated my client's Sixth Amendment right to a fair trial. They've violated the Alabama canons of judicial conduct, specifically Canon 3b-7, which prohibits ex parte communications. And they've violated your oath of office. Your Honor, every ruling you've made in this trial is now suspect. Every objection you sustained, every objection you overruled, every instruction you gave to the jury, all of it is tainted by your secret coordination with one side. Judge Hendricks's hands were shaking. What do you want, Mr. Webb? I want my client to get the fair trial he's entitled to under the Constitution. I want a mistrial declared immediately. I want you to recuse yourself from this case and any future case involving either myself or Ms. Reeves. And I want you to refer yourself to the Alabama Judicial Inquiry Commission for investigation. And if I don't, Webb's voice was steel. Then I file a formal complaint myself, along with a motion to have every case you've presided over in the past 5 years reviewed for similar misconduct. I contact the FBI about potential federal civil rights violations. And I hold a press conference on the courthouse steps explaining exactly what you did. The judge looked at Amanda Reeves, who was staring at the floor. Amanda, did you keep your copies of the messages? Her silence was answer enough. Ms. Reeves, Webb said, I'd strongly advise you to contact an attorney. You're going to need one. Judge Hendricks took a deep breath. We need to go back on the record. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric. The jury was still out, but the gallery was packed with spectators who sensed something major was happening. Judge Hendricks looked like he'd aged 10 years in 30 minutes. The court is now in session. Before we continue, I need to make a statement on the record. Every eye in the courtroom locked onto him. It has come to the court's attention that I engaged in improper communications with the prosecution during the course of this trial. These communications violated ethical rules and compromised the defendant's right to a fair trial. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Devon Mitchell grabbed Marcus Webb's arm. Therefore, I am declaring a mistrial in this case, effective immediately. I am recusing myself from any further proceedings in this matter and am referring myself to the Alabama Judicial Inquiry Commission for investigation. Amanda Reeves stood, her face pale. Your Honor, the state objects. The state's objection is noted and overruled. Ms. Reeves, I suggest you contact the Alabama State Bar because I suspect they'll be contacting you shortly. Judge Hendricks turned to Devon Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, on behalf of this court, I apologize. You deserved better than what you received in this courtroom. Then he did something that veteran court watchers said they'd never seen before. Judge Robert Hendricks stood, removed his robe in open court, folded it neatly, and placed it on his chair. This court is adjourned. He walked out through the side door, and he never wore that robe again. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within hours, Marcus Webb filed a formal complaint with the Alabama Judicial Inquiry Commission. He also contacted the FBI's Civil Rights Division, arguing that Judge Hendricks's actions constituted a conspiracy to deprive Devon Mitchell of his constitutional rights. The story exploded across local and then national media. Maximum Bob, the judge who had built a reputation on harsh sentences and strict courtroom control, was exposed as someone who rigged trials behind the scenes. The Alabama Judicial Inquiry Commission moved quickly. They launched a comprehensive investigation, pulling records from every trial Judge Hendricks had presided over in the past 5 years where Amanda Reeves was the prosecutor. What they found was shocking. In 23 separate cases, there was evidence of electronic communications between Hendricks and Reeves discussing trial strategy, jury perception, and how to limit defense effectiveness. 23 cases. 23 defendants who may have been convicted in rigged trials. Judge Hendricks was given a choice: resign immediately or face formal removal proceedings. He resigned within a week. Amanda Reeves faced disbarment proceedings. The Alabama State Bar found that she had engaged in conduct involving dishonesty, fraud, deceit, and misrepresentation, and had prejudiced the administration of justice. She was disbarred and can never practice law again in Alabama. The FBI investigation resulted in federal charges. Both Hendricks and Reeves were charged with conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law, a federal crime. Hendricks pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. Reeves fought the charges but was convicted at trial and sentenced to 2 years. Devon Mitchell's case was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it can never be refiled. The state's attorney general issued a statement saying that the prosecution had been irreparably compromised and that continuing would violate Mitchell's rights. Marcus Webb became something of a legal legend in Alabama. His attention to detail and willingness to take on a sitting judge, knowing the risks involved, saved his client from a wrongful conviction. And Devon Mitchell? He walked out of that courtroom a free man. The charges that would have sent him to prison for 25 years evaporated because of one attorney who noticed something off and had the courage to investigate. This case teaches us critical lessons about power, accountability, and the justice system. First, judges are not infallible. We're taught to respect the court, and we should. But judges are human beings who sometimes abuse their power. The black robe doesn't make someone incapable of corruption. Second, ex parte communications destroy justice. When a judge secretly coordinates with one side, the trial becomes theater. The defendant never had a chance. This is why ex parte communications are absolutely forbidden. They turn the adversarial system into a rigged game. Third, technology leaves trails. Judge Hendricks and Amanda Reeves thought they were being clever by using personal phones. But they used government Wi-Fi, which meant their private messages were logged and discoverable. In the digital age, there's no such thing as a truly secret communication. Fourth, defense attorneys must be vigilant. Marcus Webb noticed something subtle, a pattern in how objections were made. Most attorneys would have missed it or dismissed it as coincidence. But Webb trusted his instincts and investigated. That attention to detail saved his client's life. Fifth, corruption isn't always about money. Judge Hendricks wasn't taking bribes. He was helping a prosecutor win cases because they were friends, because he believed the defendants were guilty anyway, because he'd done it so many times it seemed normal. That's how corruption becomes systemic. It stops feeling wrong. Finally, one person standing up matters. Marcus Webb could have ignored his suspicions. He could have thought, you can't fight a judge and win. He could have advised his client to take a plea deal. But he stood up, demanded accountability, and exposed a conspiracy that had sent innocent people to prison. The broader implications of this case are still being felt in Alabama's justice system. A task force was created to review every case in which Judge Hendricks presided and Amanda Reeves prosecuted. Of those 23 cases with evidence of improper communications, 11 resulted in convictions being overturned. 11 people were released from prison or had their sentences vacated. The Alabama Supreme Court issued new rules requiring all judges to complete annual ethics training specifically focused on ex parte communications. They also implemented a random audit system for courthouse electronic communications. The Jefferson County Courthouse now requires all judges and attorneys to use separate, monitored networks if they conduct any case-related business on personal devices while in the courthouse. And Marcus Webb? He started a nonprofit legal organization called the Fair Trial Project, dedicated to investigating cases where defendants suspect judicial bias or prosecutorial misconduct. He trains defense attorneys across the country on how to spot the warning signs of corruption. Devon Mitchell, meanwhile, became an advocate for criminal justice reform. He speaks at law schools and public forums about his experience, sharing what it feels like to sit in a courtroom and realize the judge isn't neutral, that the system you're supposed to trust is actively working against you. I trusted the system, he says. I thought if I was innocent, the truth would come out. But the judge and prosecutor had decided I was guilty before we even started. If Marcus hadn't noticed what they were doing, I'd be in prison right now for a crime I didn't commit. The confrontation in that Jefferson County courtroom reminds us that justice requires eternal vigilance. It's not enough to have rules against judicial corruption. Those rules must be enforced. It's not enough to trust that judges and prosecutors will do the right thing. They must be held accountable when they don't. Judge Hendricks spent 32 years on the bench. He sent thousands of people to prison. He was respected, powerful, feared. But when Marcus Webb exposed his corruption, all of that crumbled. Because at the end of the day, the justice system isn't about judges or prosecutors or even defense attorneys. It's about protecting the rights of every person accused of a crime, guilty or innocent. When a judge rigs the game, when a prosecutor conspires to win at any cost, when the search for truth becomes a performance with a predetermined outcome, then justice dies. But when one attorney has the courage to stand up and say, "This isn't right. This isn't legal. This needs to stop," that's when the system works the way it's supposed to. Marcus Webb's 12 words. Your Honor, I have evidence that you've been communicating with the prosecution outside of court, ended a judge's career. But they did something more important. They saved an innocent man's freedom and exposed corruption that had infected dozens of cases. That's the power of accountability. That's what happens when someone refuses to accept injustice, even when it comes from the highest authority in the courtroom. What do you think? Should judges face mandatory prison time for rigging trials? Should all courtroom communications be monitored and recorded? Let us know in the comments. And if you found this breakdown valuable, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're exposing the truth about how the justice system really works, the good, the bad, and the corrupt. Thanks for watching. Remember, justice requires vigilance. Even judges aren't above the law.